It started the way most things do these days, with a comment, a throwaway opinion I left under a video about women in relationships after 40. The kind of thing I usually scroll past, but something about the way the woman in the video spoke, so certain, so smug, got under my skin. So I typed a response. Nothing dramatic, just a sentence or two. I hit send and forgot about it within minutes, not expecting anything to come of it. But then she replied. Her username wasn't familiar, but her tone was sharp, clipped, a little too clever. She disagreed with me completely. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like she was waiting for someone to challenge, like this was sport to her. I stared at her words longer than I meant to, fingers hovering above the keys. I could have ignored her. I didn't. What followed wasn't just a disagreement. It was a full-blown battle. Thread after thread, day after day. We argued about everything: intent, feminism, dating, divorce, the illusion of independence, aging, sex. I would log on and find her waiting. She always had a response, and not just any response, ones that made my stomach twist. Not because she was cruel, but because she was incisive. She got to me. At first, I was furious. How dare she? She didn't know me. She didn't know my life. But the more we fought, the more I started to look forward to her words. I would craft responses in the shower, rework my phrasing while cooking dinner. It was ridiculous, really. I was behaving like a teenager with a secret pen pal, only instead of love letters, we were trading verbal knives. And yet, there was something oddly intimate about it. No one else knew about our feud. It wasn't viral. It wasn't public enough to gain traction. Just two usernames circling each other like wild dogs. Every exchange left me breathless and a little raw. It was as if someone had found the exact places where my skin was thin and pressed just hard enough to sting. I hated her. I was fascinated by her. Her writing had rhythm. She was intelligent, witty in a way that made me grit my teeth, and annoyingly beautiful if the profile photo was to be believed, although I told myself it was probably fake. Some 20-something with too much time and a need to feel important. Still, I zoomed in on that image more than once, looking for flaws, inconsistencies, something to make her less real. But she was real. That became apparent over time. She would mention local spots, coffee shops I knew, events in the area. Slowly, I pieced it together. We lived in the same city, close even. The realization made my chest tighten. What were the chances? Suddenly, every woman I passed on the street became a possibility. Was it her? The one with the boots? The one with the sunglasses and the smirk? Then, after weeks of sparring, she dropped a comment that stopped me cold. A simple invitation. Coffee? Just one word. No smiley face, no flirtation, just the punctuation of curiosity. And for reasons I still can't fully explain, I said yes. Not because I wanted to prove her wrong, not because I needed the last word, but because something inside me had shifted, and I needed to know what she looked like when she wasn't typing. I didn't sleep the night before. I paced. I planned what I'd wear. I changed my outfit 3 times. I stared at my reflection and questioned my sanity. Meeting someone from the internet was reckless, childish, but it didn't feel that way. It felt inevitable. I arrived at the cafe early, heart pounding, palms sweating. I took the corner table so I could see everyone who walked in. And when she finally did, I recognized her immediately. Not from the photo, but from the way she moved, confident, casual. Her eyes scanned the room like she already owned it. When they landed on me, something like electricity passed between us. Not attraction, not yet, recognition. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about opinions. It wasn't about comment sections or feminism or anger. It was about me, about something inside me that had been dormant for years, something she had unknowingly awoken with every perfectly cruel sentence. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I was no longer the woman who typed that first comment. I had become someone else, someone watching, waiting, trembling under the weight of what I might discover in her eyes. She walked in like the air parted for her, not with arrogance, not even with confidence exactly, but with a kind of settled presence that made everything else in the cafe dim just slightly. She wore a coat that didn't try too hard and boots that clicked with purpose. No makeup aside from a streak of deep red on her lips, dark, matte, unapologetic. I had imagined her so many different ways, but none of them felt as jarring as the reality. She looked like a person who didn't flinch when you looked too long. I stayed seated, watching her approach with a calm I didn't feel. She saw me immediately, as if she'd known all along what I looked like. There was no hesitation in her steps, no uncertainty in her eyes. She moved like someone who had made up her mind hours ago. As she sat down across from me, I noticed the faint scent of something earthy, maybe patchouli, maybe just warm skin. I couldn't tell which part made me more aware of my own body. We ordered our drinks, her voice low and clear. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to. Her lips were the kind that made you think of heat even when the air was cold. She wrapped both hands around her cup when it arrived, fingers long and bare, nails unpainted. The contrast between the black coffee and her red mouth was almost absurd in its intimacy. I felt like I was watching something I shouldn't. Our conversation didn't start with small talk. We picked up right where we had left off online, but it felt different in person. The words weren't typed. They were spoken, lived in the air between us, too real to ignore. Her eyes held mine as she spoke, and I couldn't decide if she was daring me to look away or hoping I wouldn't. Every time I opened my mouth, I felt the pull of her attention like gravity. It didn't matter what we said. It mattered how it felt to be saying it. She laughed at one point, sharp and sudden, and I felt it like a slap and a kiss at once. It wasn't polite or reserved. It was real. I couldn't remember the last time someone laughed at something I said without softening it. I sipped my coffee, not because I wanted it, but to have something to do with my hands. It was bitter, too hot, but I didn't complain. I needed the burn. I needed something to anchor me. She leaned back in her seat, stretching one arm over the back of the booth like she owned the place. The neckline of her shirt slipped slightly, exposing a clean line of skin that I tried not to follow with my eyes. I failed. There was a birthmark, or maybe a freckle, just above her collarbone, and for a moment, all I could think about was touching it. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown woman. I wasn't supposed to be undone by a shoulder. She asked me something, and I didn't catch it right away. I was too deep in the noise in my own head. I nodded, pretended, let the sound of her voice fill in the blank. Her words weren't what mattered. What mattered was the way she looked at me when I answered, like she was trying to understand how I worked, like she was already inside some hidden part of me, rearranging things without asking permission. Time moved differently in that cafe. People came and went. The noise ebbed and flowed, but we sat still, tethered to each other by something I couldn't name. I watched the way she stirred her coffee with the end of her spoon, slow and methodical, and wondered if she was always this composed, or if it was a performance. Either way, I found myself wanting to unravel her, to see what she looked like when she stopped trying to be so sharp. At one point, our hands brushed on the table. Accidental, maybe. Her skin was warm, drier than I expected. Mine was shaking. She didn't react. Neither did I. But my breath caught for just a second, And in that second, everything shifted. I could feel the edges of something new pushing into the space between us, something quiet but unrelenting. When she stood up to go, I felt the loss like a drop in pressure. She pulled on her coat slowly, eyes still on mine. There was no promise in her expression, no assumption, just a question, unspoken and hovering. I followed her out into the cold without thinking, as if my body had made the decision before my mind caught up. The air outside was biting, but it cleared the fog in my head just enough to realize how close I had come to losing control. We walked in silence at first, side by side, our steps falling into rhythm. There was no destination, no plan, just movement. I became aware of everything, how our elbows almost touched, how her breath fogged the air, how my heart pounded like I'd done something dangerous. I couldn't look at her directly, so I looked at the sidewalk, the shadows, anything else. But I felt her gaze on me, steady and unreadable. She led the way, not with words, but with presence. I followed, not blindly, not reluctantly, but with the kind of curiosity that burns low and hot. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I couldn't go back to the version of myself that existed before this day, the one who argued for the sake of principle, the one who didn't know what it was like to sit across from a woman with black coffee and red lips and feel her own body betray her. I knew even then, even as we turned a corner into a quieter street, that something irreversible had begun, and I wasn't ready to stop it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Her apartment was smaller than I expected, just one long room divided by bookshelves and low lighting, with an open window that let in the sound of passing cars. It smelled like something herbal, maybe sage or sandalwood, and under that, something warmer, skin-like. She didn't say anything when we walked in. She just shrugged off her coat and tossed it onto a chair, moving through the space like it was an extension of her body. I stood by the door longer than necessary, taking in the uneven stack of records, the mismatched mugs, the plant with curling brown leaves on the sill. I had never felt so present in my own skin, and yet so unsure of what to do with my hands. She offered me a drink without asking what I wanted. I accepted it automatically, sipping something dark and too strong, grateful for the burn in my throat. She moved with an ease I couldn't imitate. I watched her from the couch as she bent to light a candle on the table, her back curved, her shirt riding up just enough to show a sliver of skin above her waistband. I looked away, then back again, shame and hunger tangling in my stomach like vines. My body was alert in a way I hadn't known it could still be. When she sat beside me, the cushion dipped under her weight, and suddenly the room felt smaller. My breath caught as her thigh brushed mine, casual but too much. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself not to react. But then her fingers rested on my knee, so light they almost weren't there, and the room tilted. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, willing my heartbeat to slow down, knowing it wouldn't. Her hand lingered. The heat of it bled through the fabric of my jeans, into my skin, then deeper. I could feel her pulse in her fingertips, or maybe it was mine, surging up to meet her. She started tracing small circles just above my knee, each pass more deliberate. The glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy. My throat dried. I stared at the candle, the wax pooling at its base, and let her touch erase every thought that wasn't about what might happen next. She didn't rush. Her fingers traveled slowly, up the inside of my thigh, pausing just short of anything inappropriate. It wasn't sexual yet. It was exploratory, patient. She was learning me like Braille, mapping terrain I hadn't let anyone near in years. My legs parted slightly, barely, but it was enough. Enough for her to slide her hand higher, under the hem of my shirt, her knuckles brushing the skin just above my waistband. I inhaled sharply, and she stopped. That stillness was louder than anything. Her hand resting there, unmoving, warm, waiting. I felt the shift inside me like a door swinging open. I didn't think, I didn't plan. I placed my hand over hers, not to stop her, but to anchor her there. I needed the weight of her palm against my stomach, needed to feel that I wasn't imagining the fire between us. Her skin was dry and soft, and when she flexed her fingers just slightly, I exhaled. She turned to face me, and even though I wasn't looking at her directly, I could feel her watching me. My face, my lips, the way my chest rose and fell, my body buzzed with electricity. Every inch of me was aware of every inch of her. I couldn't remember the last time someone had made me feel like this, like I was made of glass and gasoline, fragile and just waiting to ignite. Then she leaned in, not all the way, just close enough that I could feel the heat of her breath along my neck. Her fingers slipped under my shirt completely now, palm flat against my stomach, then sliding up, slow and reverent, to the underside of my bra. My back arched involuntarily, pressing me closer to her hand. Her thumb grazed the curve of my rib cage, and I realized I was trembling. I wanted to say something, anything, but language had left me. There was only sensation now, her scent, her touch, the soft drag of her shirt against my bare arm. I closed my eyes, let it all in, let go of whatever part of me had still been trying to make this logical. Her hand cupped my breast gently, not possessive, not forceful, just certain. Her thumb found my nipple through the fabric, and when she brushed across it, I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from moaning. I turned my head slightly, and her lips found my jaw. Not a kiss, just a press of warmth. Her other hand slid behind my neck, fingers threading into my hair, grounding me. I was liquid now, pliable, surrendering inch by inch. I didn't know what I looked like in that moment, but I knew I would have stayed like that forever if she hadn't moved. She pulled me toward her, and our mouths met in a kiss that wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was slow, purposeful, exploratory. Her lips tasted faintly of coffee and something sweeter. My hands found her waist, fingers digging into the cotton of her shirt, anchoring me as she deepened the kiss. Her tongue slipped between my lips, tentative at first, then bolder. I opened for her completely. Time fractured. Nothing existed but her mouth, her breath, her fingers still moving under my clothes. I let myself sink into it, into her. I stopped thinking about where I was, who I was, what came next. I only thought of sensation, how she tasted, how she felt, how her body fit against mine. Her hand slid lower again, this time moving toward the button of my jeans. She didn't undo it, not yet, just rested there, pressing lightly, reminding me of the possibility. My whole body burned. I was aching in places I'd forgotten could ache. I pressed my forehead to hers, breathing hard, flushed from the inside out. Her hand slipped out from under my shirt, and I almost whimpered at the loss. But then she took my hand in hers and guided it to her thigh, just resting there, like a challenge, like permission. I squeezed gently, felt the strength of her leg beneath my fingers. She didn't move, just watched me, waiting to see what I would do. And I understood then that this wasn't just about touch. It was about power, trust, surrender. I slid my hand higher. She let me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Everything was said in the silence between our breaths. The way her pupils dilated when I touched her. The way she exhaled my name without sound. We had begun something neither of us could stop. And as her fingers found my wrist again, guiding me closer, I knew I didn't want to. After that night, everything changed, but nothing did. We didn't talk about what happened. There were no follow-up messages, no dramatic confessions, no whispered acknowledgments. But when I saw her again, something in the air between us had thickened. The way she looked at me was different. Not more obvious, not bolder, but deeper, quieter, like her gaze had learned a new language, and mine had too. It became a pattern, a silent choreography. We saw each other more often, with excuses too thin to matter. A new coffee place, a film screening, a pop-up gallery neither of us cared about. I started watching how she moved when she thought I wasn't looking, the tilt of her head when she read, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her cup, the way her mouth parted slightly when she was thinking. It became a kind of hunger, visual, patient, never quite satisfied. She began touching me more in public, but always in ways that could be explained away, her fingers brushing mine while handing over a drink, a palm resting on my lower back while walking through a narrow doorway, her knee nudging mine under the table. It was casual to anyone else, but my body kept score. Each contact left a mark. Each glance held weight. We were building something without saying a word about it. At her apartment, the touches grew longer, slower. There were times she would lean against the counter while I spoke, just watching me, her eyes soft, unreadable. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, my chest, every time her gaze lingered too long. She studied me like I was something she had found and was still deciding whether to keep. I tried to mirror that calm detachment, but I failed. I was coming apart inside. There were evenings when we said we were watching a movie, but the film played forgotten in the background while we lay side by side on the couch, not quite touching, but close enough that the static between us could have lit the whole room. I could feel her breath at the edge of my neck when she shifted. I would turn slightly, just enough to meet her eyes, and we would hold that look for a heartbeat too long before pretending nothing happened. That game became its own form of intimacy. One night, she rested her head on my lap without asking. My hand moved instinctively to her hair, fingertips threading through the strands. Her eyes closed, her breath even. I stared at the curve of her jaw, her temple, the flutter of her lashes. I memorized her like scripture. I didn't speak. I just kept stroking her hair until my hand went numb, afraid that stopping would break whatever spell we had both chosen to live inside. My body became attuned to her presence in ways I couldn't control. I would feel her behind me before she spoke. I could sense the shift in air when she entered a room. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night with the certainty that she had dreamed about me, even if we were miles apart. There was a tension in my spine that didn't go away, a pull low in my stomach that flared every time she touched her own lips in thought, or stretched, or laughed unexpectedly. I was becoming sensitized to her. She was becoming the measure of my want. I began to notice how much of her had quietly occupied my life, her hoodie on the back of my chair, her music in my playlists, her scent in my sheets, even when she hadn't been there. I saw her name on my phone and felt a tremor. I typed messages and deleted them. I stared at our old comment threads and read them like love letters written in code. I couldn't tell when the line had blurred, only that it had. We weren't arguing anymore. We were circling. I caught myself dressing differently, unconsciously selecting clothes that clung just a little closer, colors she once said suited me. I started wearing perfume again, nothing loud, just a trace of something floral on my wrists, in case she leaned in too close. I painted my nails for the first time in years. I shaved on days I knew I might see her. I told myself it meant nothing, but it did. There was a night I arrived at her place and found her sketching on the floor, barefoot, one leg curled under her. She looked up and smiled with a slowness that made my knees feel untrustworthy. I sat beside her and let the side of my thigh press against hers. We stayed that way for hours, just our legs touching, her pencil moving across the page, the only sound the soft rhythm of graphite and breath. I didn't ask what she was drawing. I didn't need to. I had already made peace with the fact that parts of me now lived inside her quiet. We had stopped asking permission. She would reach for me without warning, fingers curling around my wrist, dragging her thumb along my pulse as if checking for proof of something. I would lean against her on the couch, resting my cheek against her shoulder, heart steady but mind unraveling. It was never declared, never labeled, never pushed forward, but it was happening. The daily absorption of one into the other, a slow corrosion of the space between us. Sometimes she would catch me staring. She never looked away. She let me. And in those moments, I felt seen in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. It wasn't just about lust. It wasn't even about affection. It was recognition. Like she knew the version of me I had been trying to hide, even from myself, and she wanted that version anyway. I stopped pretending I didn't want her. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know if saying it would ruin what we had built in the silence. We weren't lovers, not exactly, not yet. But we weren't just friends either. We were something waiting to tip, something that had already begun to fall. The way she looked at me had become addictive. It wasn't overt or possessive. It was steady, curious, like she saw layers even I hadn't peeled back. I didn't need her to touch me. Her eyes did enough. They had become a habit, a ritual, a language. And without realizing it, I had started worshiping at the altar of her gaze. It happened the way quiet disasters always do, without warning, without preparation, and without any chance of turning back. I had gone out that afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary, just errands and noise to fill the space between days. But then I saw her, across the street, laughing with someone else, a woman, younger, prettier in that way that meant less lived in, less tired, less bruised by time. Her hand was on the woman's back, light, familiar. My chest tightened with something that wasn't jealousy, not exactly, but something more feral, more ancient. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I walked away, heart pounding, throat tight, as if I had caught her doing something she never promised not to do. I knew we had no rules, no definitions, no claims, but that didn't stop the sting. My thoughts spiraled in fast, brutal circles. Every glance, every touch, every unsaid thing now felt foolish, delusional. I got home and tore the sheets off my bed like they were soaked in something poisonous. I opened a bottle of wine, drank too much, stared at my phone for hours without typing a single word. She arrived after sunset, unannounced, like always. She let herself in with that infuriating casualness, her keys dropping into the bowl like nothing was wrong. I stood in the kitchen, back to her, body stiff, breath shallow. She moved behind me silently, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin radiating across the small space. Her presence filled the room like smoke. I wanted to yell. I wanted to demand something, answers, apologies, clarity, but I stayed still, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. Then her hand touched my waist, gently, slowly. Her lips brushed the back of my neck with a softness that made my spine curl. I hated her for that, for knowing exactly where my resolve thinned. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She just sank her teeth lightly into my shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to remind me she was there. I gasped. My body arched back against her before I could stop it. Her hand slid under my shirt, fingers cool, deliberate. She pressed me against the counter, her body flush with mine. I should have pulled away. I should have said no, but instead, I tilted my head to give her better access to my neck. Her mouth opened wider, tongue dragging slowly, teeth grazing again, this time with more pressure. I moaned, not out of pleasure, but out of the relief of being consumed. She turned me around and kissed me like we were fighting. Her mouth was all teeth and heat, her hands gripping my hips like she was holding on to something slipping away. I kissed her back with everything I'd been holding in: rage, want, grief. Our lips bruised, our breathing ragged. She pushed me back against the fridge, and I let her. Her thigh slid between mine, and I ground down on it instinctively, shamelessly, lost in the friction, the violence of it. We moved to the floor, clothes stripped in hurried motions, mouths never quite parting. She pushed me down, straddling my waist, her nails leaving crescents on my ribs. I clawed at her back, needing to mark her the way she was marking me. Her mouth found my breast, and she bit, not cruelly, but possessively. I gasped and arched beneath her, her name slipping from my mouth like a confession. She kissed lower, her mouth traveling down my stomach with a hunger that was almost frightening. I spread my legs without thinking, needing her there, needing the only thing that made sense. When her tongue touched me, I cried out, fingers tangled in her hair, hips rising. She didn't tease, she devoured. Every flick, every suck, every gasp she drew from me felt like punishment and reward. I came quickly, violently, body writhing, skin flushed, throat hoarse. But she wasn't done. She kissed her way back up, her mouth slick with me, her eyes locked on mine. I reached for her, pulling her close, tasting myself on her lips as she straddled my thigh. She ground against me, her breath hot against my cheek, her body heavy and desperate. I slid my hand into her underwear and found her soaked. She gasped into my ear, hips moving in time with my fingers. I stroked her slowly, then faster, until she shattered against me with a cry that sounded like a wound reopening. We collapsed together, limbs tangled, sweat slick and shaking. Her head rested on my chest, and I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know if what we had done was love or madness. I didn't know if I felt better or worse. All I knew was that she had claimed something inside me with her mouth, and I had let her. There was a mark on my neck the next morning. Deep, purple, almost obscene. I traced it in the mirror with trembling fingers. It throbbed when I swallowed. I didn't cover it. I didn't hide it. I wore it like a bruise and a medal. I had no idea what she meant to me anymore, but her mouth had rewritten something under my skin, and I didn't want it to heal. It didn't stop after that. If anything, it deepened, burrowed itself into my routine like a splinter I couldn't or didn't want to. She was everywhere, in my sheets, on my skin, between my thoughts. Even when she wasn't near me, I felt her, like heat radiating from something just out of sight. I would reach for my coffee and feel the ghost of her fingers around my wrist. I would lie in bed and see her mouth, parted and flushed, hovering just above mine. She had infected me. I tried to create distance. I turned my phone face down, deleted her messages, ignored the buzzing in my pocket when I knew it was her. I stopped replying to her comments online, even when she poked at me with a line I couldn't resist. I went out more, sat in restaurants alone, as if occupying a new space could unstick her from my system. But it didn't matter where I went or who I saw. She was always there, in the rhythm of my heartbeat, in the low hum beneath my thoughts, in the back of my throat like a secret I couldn't swallow. Sometimes I wondered if I was even still angry. Maybe what I called anger was just the shape her absence took. I hated how much power she had over me without even trying. I hated how I craved it. Her chaos, her silence, her presence, even her cruelty. She would show up uninvited, toss her coat on the same chair, and kiss me like she owned me. And I would let her, every single time. It wasn't even about sex anymore, though sex was the easiest part, the part that made sense. Our bodies knew what to do. They followed patterns, mapped each other without confusion. It was everything around the sex that made me feel like I was slipping. The after, the before, the unspoken. I would catch her watching me from across the room, lips parted just slightly, and I would feel the ache between my legs start all over again. It was a loop, a fever, a ritual with no God. We never spoke about the other woman. She never brought it up, and I never asked. But sometimes I saw her eyes flicker when I pulled away too fast, or stayed dressed too long, or didn't return her touch immediately. It was subtle, barely there, but I noticed, and she noticed that I noticed. Our tension became layered, reflexive, almost erotic. Every withheld word, every loaded glance, every bruise that lingered longer than it should have. It was like we were building something out of unfinished sentences and bitten tongues. She once left a pair of earrings on my nightstand, small silver hoops I'd never seen her wear before. I didn't move them. I just looked at them for days, like they were evidence in a case I couldn't quite close. When I finally picked them up, they were warm, as if they had absorbed her body heat and refused to let it go. I held them in my palm until my skin tingled, then placed them back, carefully, like they belonged there. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. The people around me started to notice. Friends asked if I was sleeping enough, if I'd met someone, if I was okay. I nodded, lied, smiled. But under the surface, I was unraveling in slow motion. I didn't know how to talk about her, about us, about this thing that was neither love nor lust, not quite toxic, but far from clean. I didn't want to be saved from it. I wanted to drown deeper. Some nights I would wake up from dreams so vivid I'd have to check the sheets to be sure they weren't real. Dreams where she whispered things into my mouth. Dreams where her teeth scraped my shoulder, slow and deliberate. Dreams where I begged. I stopped trying to understand if they were memories or fantasies. I stopped caring. My body reacted the same either way, burning, aching, trembling. She had rewritten my sleep, too. One evening, I came home to find her already inside, curled up in the corner of my couch like she belonged to the room. Her phone was on silent, face down, her shoes discarded in a way that made my chest tighten. She looked up at me, and there it was again, that look, the one that said she knew exactly what she was doing to me and had no intention of stopping. I didn't speak. I just walked to her and dropped to my knees in front of her, my head in her lap. She stroked my hair as if I were a pet. I closed my eyes and let her. The line between us had vanished, or maybe it had never been there at all. I couldn't remember a version of myself that hadn't been tangled in her orbit. She had bled into everything, my routines, my appetite, my reflections. I touched myself thinking of her. I avoided mirrors because of her. I craved her voice, her silence, her bite. What we had wasn't love, not in the way I'd ever known it. It was darker, stickier, more addictive, like a habit I didn't want to quit. I started writing again, late at night, just to get the noise out of my head. But every sentence led back to her. Every metaphor collapsed into her mouth, her hands, her shadow on my bedroom wall. She became the only language I spoke fluently. I wrote things I would never show her, things I couldn't bear to admit out loud. that I loved the way she made me feel ugly and beautiful in the same breath, that I hated her and wanted her inside me at the same time, that I wasn't sure where she ended and I began. By then, the infection was complete. It didn't hurt anymore. It simply existed. Quiet, constant, incurable.